Maria Santos had always dreamed of a better life. At 23 years old, she carried her first child and worked as a cleaning lady in the bustling city of Phoenix. Her husband Carlos worked construction jobs that took him away from home for weeks at a time. When he told her about a high-paying job opportunity in a remote mining camp near the Mexican border, they both saw it as their chance to save money for their baby's future. The mining camp was much more isolated than they had imagined. Located 40 miles from the nearest town, it sat in the middle of the Sonoran Desert like a forgotten outpost. The company provided basic housing. Small wooden huts with tin roofs that baked under the merciless Arizona sun. Maria was 8 months pregnant when they arrived, her belly round and heavy with their child. For the first few weeks, everything seemed manageable. Carlos worked long shifts, operating heavy machinery, while Maria tried to make their tiny hut feel like home. She hung curtains made from old sheets and planted small cacti and coffee cans outside their door. The other workers were mostly single men who kept to themselves, but a few families lived there too. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Chen, an older woman whose husband worked as a mechanic for the mining equipment. The trouble started when the mine began having financial problems. Workers complained about delayed paychecks, and rumors spread that the company might shut down operations. Tensions grew high among the men, and several fights broke out in the mess hall. The camp manager, a harsh man named Thompson, became increasingly aggressive with the workers, threatening anyone who complained about conditions. One evening in late September, Carlos came home looking worried and angry. He had confronted Thompson about 3 weeks of missing wages, and the manager had threatened to fire him and throw them out of their housing. Carlos decided they needed to leave immediately, before things got worse. He planned to drive to Phoenix the next morning to look for other work, leaving Maria behind just for a few days to pack their belongings. That night, Maria felt the first warning signs that her labor might be starting soon. She experienced mild contractions and a dull ache in her lower back, but she convinced herself it was just the stress and discomfort of pregnancy. She did not tell Carlos about these signs because she did not want to worry him or delay his job search. She believed she still had several weeks before the baby would come. Carlos left before dawn, kissing Maria goodbye and promising to return within 3 days with news of employment. He took their only vehicle, an old pickup truck that barely ran but was their only means of transportation. Maria watched him drive away down the dusty road that connected the camp to the outside world, feeling both hopeful and anxious about their future. The camp felt different without Carlos there to protect her. The remaining workers seemed more hostile, and Thompson made inappropriate comments whenever he saw her. Mrs. Chen tried to check on Maria, but her husband had also left to look for work in another state, and she was preparing to leave the camp herself within days. On the second day after Carlos departed, Maria's contractions became stronger and more regular. She realized with growing panic that she was going into active labor, several weeks earlier than expected. She tried to call Carlos using the camp's single payphone, but the line was dead. The ancient telephone system had been damaged during a recent storm, and no one had bothered to repair it. Maria approached Thompson, explaining her situation and begging him to drive her to the nearest hospital. The cruel manager laughed at her request, saying he was not running a taxi service for pregnant women. He told her that if she wanted medical help, she should have planned better before coming to such a remote location. His callous response shocked and terrified Maria, who realized she was completely alone and vulnerable. Mrs. Chen had already left the camp that morning, taking the last functioning vehicle besides Thompson's truck. The other remaining workers either did not have cars or refused to help when Maria desperately asked for assistance. Some claimed they could not spare the time, while others seemed to enjoy watching her desperation. As evening approached, Maria's labor pains intensified dramatically. She could barely walk between contractions, and she knew she would not be able to wait for Carlos to return. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not, and she had no choice but to face this terrifying situation alone. Thompson, perhaps feeling some guilt about his earlier refusal to help, eventually agreed to let Maria use one of the abandoned huts at the edge of the camp. He claimed it would give her more privacy and space than their tiny shared living quarters. In reality, he wanted to distance himself from any responsibility for what might happen to her. The abandoned hut was in terrible condition, with a leaking roof and broken windows that let in sand and insects. Maria gathered whatever supplies she could find: old blankets, a few clean towels, and some bottled water. She had no medical supplies, no pain medication, and no experience with childbirth. Her mother had died when Maria was young, and she had never been around other women during labor. As night fell over the desert, Maria found herself completely alone in the dilapidated hut, with only the sounds of coyotes and wind for company. Her contractions were becoming unbearably intense, and she knew there was no turning back from what lay ahead. She had never felt so frightened and helpless in her entire life, but she tried to stay strong for her unborn child's sake. The first night alone in the hut was the longest of Maria's life. Her contractions came in waves of increasing intensity, each one making her cry out into the empty darkness. She had spread the old blankets on the dusty floor and tried to create a clean space for the birth, but everything around her was dirty and broken. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, carrying sand that stung her eyes and covered everything with grit. Maria had no idea how long labor was supposed to last, or what warning signs might indicate serious problems. She only knew that the pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and it seemed to be getting worse with each passing hour. Between contractions, she tried to rest and conserve her strength, but fear kept her mind racing with terrible possibilities. By dawn, Maria was exhausted and dehydrated. She had been in labor for nearly 12 hours, and the baby still had not come. Her water had broken sometime during the night, soaking the blankets beneath her, and she worried about infection in the unsanitary conditions. She called out for help several times, hoping someone from the camp might hear her, but no one came to check on her. The temperature inside the hut rose quickly as the sun climbed higher. The tin roof acted like an oven, trapping heat that made breathing difficult. Maria felt dizzy and weak, struggling to stay conscious between the powerful contractions. She rationed her small supply of water, taking tiny sips to make it last as long as possible. Around midday, something went wrong. Maria felt a sharp, tearing pain that was different from the regular contractions, and she began bleeding heavily. She had no medical knowledge to understand what was happening, but instinct told her that this was dangerous for both her and the baby. Panic set in as she realized she might be dying alone in this awful place. She tried once more to crawl outside and call for help, but the effort left her too weak to continue. The nearest occupied hut was at least 200 yards away, across open desert that shimmered with heat waves. Maria collapsed just outside her door, unable to go any further, and resigned herself to whatever fate awaited her and her child. It was then that she heard the sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance. At first, she thought she was hallucinating from pain and exhaustion, but the noise grew louder and more distinct. Someone was approaching the camp along the main road, traveling fast and kicking up a cloud of dust. The motorcycle belonged to Jake Morrison, a former military medic who had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan before returning to civilian life. Jake worked as a freelance security consultant for mining companies, checking their remote operations for safety violations and security weaknesses. He was 35 years old, tough and weathered from years of hard living, but he had never lost his instinct to help people in danger. Jake had served with distinction in some of the world's most dangerous combat zones, earning commendations for his bravery under fire. He had saved dozens of wounded soldiers during his military service, working under impossible conditions to keep people alive until they could reach proper medical facilities. After leaving the army, he struggled to find his place in civilian life, taking dangerous jobs that reminded him of the intensity and purpose he had felt during wartime. The mining company had hired Jake to investigate reports of safety violations and worker complaints at the desert camp. He was supposed to arrive the following week, but had decided to come early after hearing rumors about the camp's financial troubles and poor management. Jake knew that desperate companies often cut corners on safety, putting workers at risk to save money. As Jake approached the camp on his motorcycle, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The place seemed almost deserted, with only a few vehicles visible and no signs of normal activity. He had visited dozens of mining operations over the years, and this one felt abandoned and hostile in a way that set off alarm bells in his mind. Jake parked his motorcycle near the main buildings and began looking around for someone to talk to about the camp's operations. That was when he heard Maria's weak cries for help coming from the direction of the abandoned huts. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Someone was in serious distress and calling out desperately for assistance. Following the sound, Jake jogged toward the old huts at the edge of camp. He found Maria collapsed in the doorway of one building, covered in sweat and blood, clearly in the final stages of a difficult labor. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, and she looked up at him with eyes full of fear and desperate hope. Jake's military training kicked in immediately. He had delivered babies before during his service overseas, helping civilian women who had been caught in war zones without access to medical care. While childbirth was not his specialty, he understood the basics and knew how to stay calm under pressure. He quickly assessed the situation, checking Maria's pulse and trying to determine how far along she was in the delivery process. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not, and there was no time to transport Maria to a hospital even if they had a vehicle available. Jake would have to deliver the baby right there in the abandoned hut, using whatever supplies he could improvise. Jake introduced himself and assured Maria that he was going to help her through this safely. His calm, confident manner immediately made her feel less afraid, even though she was still in tremendous pain. For the first time since Carlos had left, Maria felt like someone actually cared about her survival and was capable of doing something to help. Moving quickly but carefully, Jake gathered everything he could find that might be useful for the delivery. He had a basic first aid kit on his motorcycle, including sterile gauze and antiseptic solution. From around the camp, he collected clean towels, bottled water, and even found some soap in an abandoned building. Jake helped Maria back inside the hut and positioned her as comfortably as possible for the birth. He used his military field knife to cut strips of cloth that could be used to tie off the umbilical cord when the time came. Throughout these preparations, he kept talking to Maria in a steady, reassuring voice, explaining what he was doing and helping her focus on breathing through the contractions. The baby began crowning just as Jake finished his preparations, and he guided Maria through the final pushes that would bring her child into the world. Despite the primitive conditions and lack of proper medical equipment, his experience and calm demeanor made all the difference in what could have been a tragic situation. Maria pushed with every ounce of strength she had left, following Jake's calm instructions as he guided the baby's head and shoulders through the birth canal. After hours of agony and fear, she felt a tremendous release as her daughter slipped into Jake's waiting hands. The baby was small, but appeared healthy, crying loudly as she took her first breaths in the dusty desert hut. Jake quickly cleared the baby's airways and checked her breathing and heart rate. Despite being born several weeks early, the little girl seemed strong and responsive. He wrapped her in the cleanest towel he could find and placed her on Maria's chest while he prepared to cut the umbilical cord. Using his sterilized knife and the cloth strips he had prepared, Jake tied off and cut the cord with practiced efficiency. The delivery was not over yet, however. Maria still needed to expel the placenta, and Jake remained alert for signs of excessive bleeding or other complications that could be life-threatening. His military medical training had taught him that the period immediately after birth could be just as dangerous as the delivery itself, especially in unsanitary conditions without proper equipment. Fortunately, the placenta delivered naturally within a few minutes, and Maria's bleeding remained within normal limits. Jake helped clean her up as much as possible, and made sure both mother and baby were stable before allowing himself to relax slightly. The immediate crisis had passed, but they still needed to get proper medical attention as soon as possible. Jake used his satellite phone to call for emergency medical evacuation. He explained the situation to the dispatcher, providing their exact GPS coordinates and requesting a medical helicopter if possible. The nearest hospital was over an hour away by road, but a helicopter could reach them much faster and provide advanced medical care during transport. While they waited for the medical team to arrive, Jake focused on keeping Maria and her baby comfortable and monitoring their vital signs. He found some clean sheets in another abandoned hut and used them to create a more sanitary environment. He also gave Maria small sips of electrolyte solution from his emergency supplies to help combat dehydration. Maria could barely speak through her exhaustion, but she managed to whisper her gratitude to Jake for saving her and her daughter's lives. She told him about Carlos and how he was supposed to return soon from his job search. Jake assured her that everything would be fine now and that she would be reunited with her husband at the hospital. The rescue helicopter arrived within 45 minutes, landing in a clear area near the camp and kicking up enormous clouds of dust. The medical crew consisted of a doctor and 2 paramedics, who quickly took over Maria's care, checking her vital signs and preparing both mother and baby for transport. They praised Jake for his excellent work under difficult circumstances, noting that his quick thinking and medical knowledge had likely prevented a tragedy. As Maria was being loaded into the helicopter, Thompson finally appeared, drawn by the noise and commotion. He seemed shocked to learn what had happened and tried to claim that he had been unaware of Maria's situation. Jake confronted him angrily about his callous refusal to help a pregnant woman in labor, making it clear that there would be consequences for his negligent behavior. The helicopter lifted off with Maria and her baby, heading toward the regional medical center where they would receive proper care. Jake watched them disappear into the sky, feeling the satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a real difference in someone's life. This was why he had become a medic in the first place, to help people when they needed it most. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that both Maria and her baby were in remarkably good condition considering the circumstances of the birth. The little girl weighed just over 5 pounds, but was healthy and strong. Maria suffered from dehydration and exhaustion, but had no serious injuries or infections from the delivery. Carlos arrived at the hospital that evening after receiving an emergency call from the medical staff. He had been driving back to the camp with news of a new job when he got word that his wife and newborn daughter were in the hospital. The reunion was emotional and tearful, with Carlos overwhelmed by guilt for leaving Maria alone during such a critical time. Jake remained at the mining camp long enough to complete his investigation and file a report with the authorities about the dangerous conditions and Thompson's negligent behavior. His report documented numerous safety violations and led to the camp being shut down permanently within weeks. Thompson was fired and faced potential criminal charges for abandoning a pregnant woman in medical distress. The story of Maria's dramatic desert birth quickly spread through the local community and eventually reached regional news outlets. Reporters were fascinated by the tale of the military veteran who had arrived just in time to save a mother and baby from certain tragedy. Jake initially refused interviews, preferring to stay out of the spotlight, but eventually agreed to speak publicly about the experience. Maria and Carlos named their daughter Isabella, which means brave in Spanish, in honor of the courage it took to survive such a terrifying ordeal. They also gave her the middle name, Grace, to represent the miraculous timing of Jake's arrival at their darkest moment. The family moved to Phoenix as originally planned, where Carlos found steady construction work and Maria was able to stay home with baby Isabella. They remained in contact with Jake, who became something of a surrogate uncle to the little girl he had helped bring into the world. Every year on Isabella's birthday, Jake would visit the family to celebrate the anniversary of their shared survival story. Jake's heroic actions at the desert mining camp helped him find new purpose in his civilian life. He began volunteering with emergency medical services in remote areas, using his military skills to help people in situations where traditional medical care was not available. The experience reminded him that he did not need to be in a war zone to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Years later, Isabella grew up hearing the story of her dramatic birth and the stranger who had saved her life. She developed a strong interest in medicine and emergency care. Inspired by Jake's example of selfless service to others, Maria often told her daughter that she had been born with a special purpose, having survived against such long odds with the help of an unlikely hero. The abandoned mining camp gradually fell into complete ruin, its buildings claimed by the desert wind and sand. But the story of what happened there continued to inspire people who heard it, serving as a reminder that help can come from unexpected sources when we need it most. Maria's survival became a testament to human resilience and the power of one person's willingness to help a stranger in desperate need.